Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to check out this video. Before I begin, I do have a few disclaimers. First, this is the first official build that I have made a video for that I am sharing with people, so if I'm missing any information, if you want more content, if you need more explanation, please just let me know, shoot me a comment below, or send me a message. Second, this is based off of the Update 46 Week 4 PTS, which means that what you are about to see is not live. It is not guaranteed to go live. This is looking ahead to some builds that we might potentially get to make once subclassing officially goes live during the month of June of 2025. Finally, I am not the best parser, especially on my computer. I play on PlayStation. I have ESO just on my computer for the PTS so I can come in and test stuff out. So if you see some skills that aren't firing, that has to do with the lag, you might get higher numbers than I do. And finally, if you like this content, please like and subscribe so you can keep tune of any future builds or content that I continue to make. And with that being said, let's get into the build. So this build is drawing on the new subclassing feature that is about to happen, and specifically we are going to be using Necromancer, Nightblade, and Arcanist. It doesn't matter which one of those three you start with, but you do have to start with one of those three. You can see the skill lines that we will be using from them. And this build is also specifically focusing not on beaming, which I know is the Arcanist bread and butter. There's going to be so much beaming on this new update. I wanted to try something different. So let's take a look at the gear to start out with. So the first piece that we are going to be using is the Velothi or Mage's Amulet. And I know this is typically used for a beam build, but it works just great here. And the nice thing about it is it lets us simplify the rotation. We don't have to worry about Barb Trap. We get to kind of put some more other skills on there that are going to kind of give us a little bit more of passive buffs. When we're doing it, all this is doing is increasing our damage at all times, even though it does hurt our light and heavy attack damage. This is all about our skills. The next piece that we are using is, I have the Zaan mask on. This can be any one-piece monster helm that gives critical chance. They are all going to be the exact same. Slime Craw is no longer going to be dominant, so anything that's giving us that one-piece crit chance. I do have it as the mask here because habits die hard for me. You absolutely could use the shoulder for this if you don't have access to a dungeon and you decide to take some alternate routes. You can just go buy the shoulder. Our next unique kind of one piece that we're using is the Maelstrom's Perfected Greatsword. I'm using Perfected. If you can't get the Perfected, totally fine. Regular Maelstrom's Greatsword is fine. What this does is when we use our Stampede skill that you'll see later on, it's just going to increase all of our direct damage by up to 12%, which is huge, and that lasts for 18 seconds. The only thing that the Perfected gives us is a little more penetration on our back bar only. The first of our 5-piece sets that we are going to use is Aegis Collar, one of my personal favorite sets. This comes from Unhallowed Grave. It gives us 2 lines of weapon and spell damage, 1 line of crit chance, and then when we deal critical melee damage, martial melee damage, we summon a Lesser Aegis, which spins around doing an AoE of bleed damage. This is going to be up almost all of the time. It has around a 3.5 second downtime. Otherwise, it is going to be up all of the time on cooldown. We have so much crit in this build. We are doing so much martial melee damage that this will just be up. And then the final set that we are using is the Slivers of the Null Arca set from the Lucent Citadel Trial. Again, I am using the Perfected version here. If you don't have access, all you do is lose a little bit of weapon and spell damage. If you want the non-perfected version, totally fine. Now, you can interchange these two sets. I have this set up where I am weapons and jewelry for Aegis Collar and the shoulder for Aegis Collar, and then I'm doing 5 pieces body for Null Arca. And that's just because I like the second and third bonus pieces for Aegis Collar slightly more than just the second and third for Null Arca. We get a little more crit chance at all times when we're on our back bar, but you can really interchange them as much as you would like. So now let's take a look at our skills. And like I said before, this is going to be not focusing on the beam, which you may have already gotten a little hint at. So we're going to start at the front bar. You can see how I have it laid out. You can put it in whatever order makes you comfortable. So our first main starting spammable is our Writhing Runeblades, but this is really just here when we don't have anything else to cast and for something to help us build up Crux. We need Crux in order to take advantage of the Arcanist passives, as well as another skill that we're going to be using to spend the Crux on. So this is kind of the lowest priority when we get to the rotation, as you will see, but it is something nice that we have to cast in between downtimes. Next we have our Blighted Blastbones, and this is the bread and butter of this build. It's going back to old school Necro, which is one of my favorite builds. This is the stamina morph of it, and basically we are going to be casting this skill every 3 skills. Right? Skill, bones. Skill, bones, which you will see when we get to the rotation. This is going to be the majority of our damage up until we get into Execute. It does direct damage, it does AoE damage, it applies the disease status. It is doing so much for us. So once we get into Execute, we want to switch to Killer's Blade from our Runeblades. This is around that 50-ish% health that we're going to do that. Later on, we are going to actually drop Blastbones and just focus on Killer's Blade. This is going to be one if we no longer have an AoE concern that we need to worry about, as well as once the Blade starts outperforming Blastbones, we're just going to do this. By the end of our rotation, we are spamming nothing but this, and that is it. The next skill that we are going to be making use of is our Detonating Siphon, again from the Necromancer skill line. Honestly, this is much more on here for the passive of the extra damage, but when we don't have something else that we need to be casting, we have a skeleton a corpse that we can consume, we're going to do this. It has really nice damage over time, it has a really nice AoE, and it has a nice burst, which does do direct damage at the end for a little bit of extra damage. And then finally, to round out our front bar, we're going to have Camouflaged Hunter. This is mainly on here to give us that major savagery and major prophecy. We don't actually, you can get that through potions. This is allowing us to use other potions. So we don't necessarily need this, but it's also giving us passives from the Fighters Guild in order to just increase our damage. We will never be casting this in PvE, right? There's no need to draw enemies out of stealth. And then finally, for our front bar ultimate, we are going to be using the Flawless Dawnbreaker. We're not really going to cast this very often. It's on there for another Fighters Guild skill line that gives us 2 Fighters Guild skill lines, increasing our damage while on the front bar by 6%, which is a huge boost. The one nice thing about Flawless Dawnbreaker is it does have a pretty cheap ultimate casting time. So we can cast it if we know we're not going to have time to cast our main ultimate. We can use it towards the end of the fight. If we need a little bit of burst damage right away, we can go ahead and cast that. So now let's go and look at the back bar skills. So the first skill is going to be Stampede from the two-handed skill line. This is the skill that's buffed by that Maelstrom Greatsword that we are going to be using. Basically, you charge ahead, you leave a ground AoE, you damage all nearby enemies, and we're going to be buffing all of the direct damage. I would say out of anything in this build, that piece of gear and this skill are the 2 non-negotiables because everything is direct damage. This is the thing that is really making this build viable in all content, really. So then, a very important skill to have is the Tentacular Dread. This is from the Arcanist skill tree. Basically, we have Writhing Runeblades to create Crux, and we have this to consume our Crux. But it's also debuffing the enemy. So you get a standard 5% debuff to the enemy for all attacks by us. But when we consume the Crux, we can get that up to 11% increased damage taken by the enemy, which is absolutely huge. Next, we have our Relentless Focus. Just by having this slotted on either bar, anytime we make a light or heavy attack, we're only going to be light attacking with this build. We are getting a new stack. This can increase our weapon and spell damage by 400 when we are at max stacks. The stacks don't go away until we fire it. After 5 stacks, we can fire it. It's a nice bit of burst damage. If you can make it back and fire it, awesome. Otherwise, we're fine to just let it keep buffing our other skills. Next we have our Inspired Scholarship. This is kind of a passive self-buff that we are going to be putting on ourselves. Just by having it slotted, we gain Major Brutality and Major Sorcery, increasing our weapon and spell damage, which also is letting us use different potions. All this does is it creates a free crux every now and then, if we don't have one, and it adds around 4,000 damage to every class skill that we use. When you are taking this out into content, I recommend having a self-heal. I like Echoing Vigor personally. It's a slow heal over time. It heals in an AoE, so you can help out people near you. It's good to use it proactively, not reactively, right? So you kind of want to always keep it up if you're out in combat. This would be a skill that you can change out while you're parsing. I tend to. You'll see in the rotation I don't have this on. But in actual content it's good, and it honestly doesn't do much to inflate our parses. So what you see is really close to what you get. And then finally, this is going to be our main ultimate. We have the Tide King's Gaze. This is a really strong AoE ultimate. It follows the enemies around, and it is a relatively cheap ultimate to use as well, and it's easy to use. There are alternatives that you could use in place of this. If you want to use the Nightblade ultimate, that's totally fine. It requires a little bit more work. You need to know when to time it appropriately, and that's a little more complicated than I like to have to think about in a trial. This is you can do it from range, and it's really good to go. So now we're going to quickly look at the champion points that you will want to have slotted, assuming you have enough for all of them. So the first is the Exploiter. This really is only going to be if you are in an organized group. We are not causing off balance, so when you are on your own, if you really want to min-max, not the time for that, but in a group, that is a necessity. Master at Arms is your #1 priority. This is increasing all of your direct damage, which, as I have said before, this build is all direct damage. It is everything we are focusing on. So that is necessary. Wrathful Strikes, we're just adding 205 weapon and spell damage to all of our damaging abilities. So that's just giving us more damage on everything. It's direct damage, it's the damage over time, everything. Deadly Aim is our single target attacks. This is good even though not everything that we're doing is single target. Our final execute and our Writhing Runeblades are both single target, so this is really helping us in that execute. And now, let's look at the rotation. So you're going to start just by kind of pre-buffing, and you'll do this, in actual combat too. So anything that's not going to be attacking, right? When you're waiting for the tank to pull, you're going to pre-buff. In the case of this build, it's just Inspired Scholarship, and then right when the tank is about to pull, you're going to do your first Blastbones before you close the distance. So then when we actually start our rotation, we are going to start on the back bar. So we've pre-called up a Blastbones. We're going to charge forward, and we're going to do a Tentacle. We don't have any Crux yet, but that's still 5% extra damage while we're getting our Crux. We're going to refresh that as soon as we can. So after we do those two skills, you're going to flop back to your front bar, get another Blastbones going, and then get your Detonating Siphon going, and one Runeblade. Back bar, refresh what you need to. You can probably do a Spectral Bow by then. And then basically this rotation is relatively easy, albeit relatively active. And I'll stop talking here in a little bit so you can just kind of watch the rotation and watch the parse to see how it works. But the basic premise is we want to cast 2 skills and then refresh our Blastbones. So 2 skills, Blastbones, 2 skills, Blastbones. Blastbones is our main source of damage in this entire build. It is the most important thing up until around 10% of that boss's health. 10-15% when we are going to drop it and just focus on our execute with our knife. So for the majority of a boss fight, for the majority of a parse, for the majority of whatever you're doing, it's all about the Blastbone. So if you need to delay rebuffing yourself, go ahead and do that. If you need to delay building a Crux, go ahead and do that. And this is one that takes a lot of practice. You're going to be bar swapping constantly. I use a controller. I play on console mostly. I have a modded controller, so I have a button behind it that I use to bar swap, so it's very quick and easy, and I just learned to build that rotation, bar swapping into my rotation. For the Spectral Bow, fire it when you can, when you notice it. If you don't notice it, if you don't get back to it in time, if you need to cast a Blastbones, firing the Spectral Bow is probably the last thing that we need to worry about, because we have so many other great sources of damage that getting that 400 extra weapon and spell damage is more than enough. It's doing its job just by being there. And so you can see here at the end, we're still kind of calling some skeletons up until then, and then we're just, at the very end, hammering it with our execute. Basically, the way that you can know is if you have your damage numbers up, when you see that your execute is doing more damage than your Blastbones, then you want to just do the Blastbones. And we are going to take a look at how that damage looks. So the thing that you should notice here is our main source of damage is that Blighted Blastbones, then we have our execute, but then we actually have those two procs from our sets, which is how we know that our sets are actually putting in the work. And one of the best things about it is one of those is an AoE, right? So our main source of damage is an AoE. And then our second main source is also an AoE. So we are going to be doing a lot of AoE damage while not really sacrificing our main source of damage for a single target. Once we get into execute, it is largely single target focused. Sliver Assault, that proc, Relentless Focus, our Killer's Blade, those are all single target. But by the time we get to our execute, most things are going to be dead anyways. There are very few bosses that keep having ads that we need to focus down up until the end. So this will be great in any sort of content. It will perform well against a single boss. You can see, I hit, well over 120k, which for me, that's great. On live ESO PlayStation server, the most that I ever do is like, I think 115. I think maybe once in my life I got a 120 on a Necro. I'm not the best parser. I gave a disclaimer about that in the beginning, and it's not that great on my PC either. There's a lot of stuttering and lag, and sometimes I think I hit a skill and it doesn't actually fire. So you can probably get higher damage numbers than this. Is this going to be the meta? Probably not. Is it a super fun build? Absolutely. Is it a build that I think would be viable in absolutely any content, including vet trials, including doing trifectas in dungeons? Absolutely. Now, you'll obviously need to work with a trial lead, to make sure that it's bringing what your group needs to bring. But if you're just there as like a DPS, this is going to be a good, fun, relatively easy build to handle because there's so many skills that can just kind of passively be there and so many skills that can last a long time that as long as you can keep the Blastbones going, you're going to keep doing great damage. Okay, and now let's look at just a few of the other things that round out this build. So for starters, for the race I have chosen to be a Dark Elf. This is because of the passives of the Dark Elf. You get Magicka and Stamina, which is great. It gives you a little versatility, especially with armory slots. If you want to have a Magicka build on this character, you can absolutely do that. They have flame resistance, it makes you a little tankier. And then finally, we get the 256 weapon and spell damage, which is the most damage boost you can get from a racial class. So it gives us flexibility and good damage. This is a stamina build. You are chunking all 64 points into stamina. The reason why this is the stamina build is I like the stamina execute for the Nightblade a lot better than the Magicka one. So that's really the main reason. And the Blasted Blightbones is a stamina only skill, so in order to keep those two up, we need to have all of our points in stamina. For the food, when you are doing content, you're going to want the Artaeum Takeaway Broth. For your Parse, you're going to want the Lavafoot soup and salt rice. Now, if you don't want to spend, for the gold food, really any blue food that gives you max stamina and max health would be great. You could use Dubious Cameron Thrones if you need a little more recovery in that. But basically, you want health, stamina recovery are the main things. For our potions, because of the skills that we are using, we do not have to use special potions for this. We're just going to use the tristats, those crown tristats that you get all of the time in the crowns and the daily rewards. This is the place to use that if you don't have a tank that's using them. Otherwise, you can just buy health pots. From any guild store, you can make tristat health pots. Totally fine. We want health, stamina, and magicka back. Is the main thing. And then finally, this is not going to be a surprise to anyone if you've been playing a DPS build in ESO for a while. For the Mundus, we are going to choose the Thief. This increases our critical chance. So much of our build is based on critical chance. We need crit for both of our sets, and then it just is more damage. So we are going to choose the Thief. So now, let's say there's some sets that you can't get, or some things that you can't do for this build. It doesn't mean you can't use something similar. So let's take a look at some stuff that could be a good alternate in case you don't have access to all of the sets that I mentioned earlier. And as I stated earlier, the one thing that I don't think really has an alternative is the Maelstrom two-hander. You can't always just use a weapon from one of the sets you're already wearing. There's a lot of sets that I have just placed on the screen for you. I'm not going to talk about all of them individually. I did try to sort them based off of where you could source them, so if you are only able to craft, those are some good options. If you can do dungeons, right, you don't have to do vet for any of that. You don't have to do vet for any of these contents. You don't have to do vet to get the Maelstrom one either. You can just do it on normal, take your time, it saves your progress as long as you have the quest. And honestly, it's a good way to learn how to play the game as well, and you can have some fun with it as well. So a note, if you want to take a screenshot of this, pause this so you can see all the different sets that could be an option. Where it says W and J, that means that the sets aren't in the weight that we would like them to be. So this whole build is using all medium armor. We are only using medium armor because of the bonuses that we get from it. We don't really need the passives from light or heavy for this build. So the ones that say W and J is either a light set or a heavy set. So we just want to put it in weapons and jewelry, and then it doesn't affect our 7 pieces of light armor. Obviously we can't do all jewelry if we are using the Velothi Amulet. If you are using the Medusa set that is on here, you wouldn't use that amulet anyways, you would replace it. If you're using Calorians or Berserking Warrior, replace one body piece with that. I would recommend for Calorians, replace a small body piece because that is light armor. It's not going to make you, more weak and more susceptible to damage. If you are using Berserking Warrior, I would do your chest for that because it is the bulkiest piece that you have. That is heavy armor. It will just make you a little bit more tanky. So there's a lot of options. You can play around with them. You can absolutely buy gear and craft gear that can get you started on this while you work on farming the other ones. That being said, all of these do have some amount of drawback to them as compared to the sets that I had initially suggested, in my opinion. So if you're able to, I would do those sets, but any of these will work to have a variation of this no beam build. And that's pretty much the basic idea of the build. If certain skills aren't working for you, if certain gear isn't working for you, you absolutely should play around and mess it up and see what works for you. Just because this rotation works for me, just because this combination of skills works for me, doesn't mean it's a one-size-fits-all. There is a lot of freedom and flexibility in how you put things together, all for, damage that is going to be relatively close. So find out the best way for you to maximize your damage with the kind of general principles and the rationale behind, why I explained where things go. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. liking this video, come back for more. I do plan on making some more videos of this PTS because I think when subclassing goes live, ESO is going to be wild for a little bit. I think damage is going to be off the charts. If you've struggled doing content, getting some of those vet dungeons cleared, doing some of the vet content or harder content, I think after this new update, that's going to be the time to do it. We are going to be getting a huge damage boost and a lot more freedom and flexibility with how you combine skills. You aren't going to be locked into the limitations of one class or having to play just one class. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, again, please comment, let me know. If you have questions, please comment. And I hope to see you in future videos. Thank you.